Since I just finished writing my fourth book, which is the last book in the Full Spectrum Astrology series, I thought I would take this particular recording to explain a little bit about how astrology works, at least my theory of how astrology works. The theory is actually very complicated, and I talk about it in Laurentia. The fourth book, by the way, is half theory and half an interpretation of the 1,000 asteroids. I did that on purpose because I like to have things explained to myself. And when I was doing the statistics on the first 1,000 minor planet center asteroids and looking them up across all these charts, I said, how is it that these asteroids are working? There has to be some kind of believable theory out there. So I had to brush up on some quantum mechanics and do all kinds of things. And let me give you a really, really basic summary of what Laurentia says in the theory section of it. Now, even if you're not into theory, if you're the kind of person who, like me, is looking for interpretations of all kinds of bodies and asteroids and things like that, and you can't find them on the internet, then definitely pick up my book, because it's in there. If it's the first 1,000 numbered asteroids, or if it's a special cusp, or if it's a major body, it has an interpretation in Laurentia. So we've got all kinds of neat things like the asteroid armor, the asteroid Eros and Pallas, and the sun and the moon and Chiron, and all kinds of other fun stuff. It's all in there. I even interpret house cusps, because they all have to do basically with frequencies. The idea is that the sun is an energy emitter, and it throws out its energy at a particular rate called the flux. Now, because that rate is pulsating, because the flux constrains it, you basically get a power of 2 limit on regions of stability, or regions of stable energy around that central emitter. And so what that does is set up areas where it is okay to form bodies versus not okay to form bodies. And this is basically quantization. On the micro level, it relates to quantum mechanics. On the macro level, it relates to stable orbits and galaxy clustering and all of that other stuff. And so astrology can be looked at as the macro level reflection of stable orbit forming as a result of the energy that is coming off a central emitter at a particular rate. The rate is what's very, very important there. And this is similar to the way we do notes. If you're familiar with music, you know you've got this 2 to the 12 thing going, or the 2 to the 1/12 thing going within a particular octave. And so it is with planets. Now, there's a lot more to that theory. I apologize if my short version of it makes it sound like just a bunch of hogwash, because it's totally not. There's a lot more to it in Laurentia. It has to do with math and set theory and passable error and gravitational wells and fine structure constant and things, which I calculate in there, by the way, and some other stuff. But the point is that you've got a planet like Mars, for example, which has which has enough gravitational energy to kind of own this band here. We call it the 8th band. It's not really the 8th, but in the order where we start counting, it's the 8th, so whatever. And then you've got Jupiter, which more or less owns the 9th band, or Sagittarius, which more or less owns the 10th band, and that's because these guys are big. And there are a whole bunch of little guys, and they're all coupled to each other. But more or less, the major planets own an entire band. But the major planets are really low resolution compared to the kinds of little bodies that can float around between major planets. So let's say that Mars, for example, owns a band gravitationally. It more or less does. And Jupiter, same thing. Now, of course, they're not the same size, but we're talking about gravitational regions. We're not talking about the size of the planet. In between the Mars and Jupiter-owned bands, you have these asteroids here. And it turns out that these asteroids, use stable points, or they occupy their own little mini stable points in between bands. And again, I had to understand this for myself, and so the theory is in Laurentia as to why this happens. It's just more quantization, but it's quantization within a particular error level, and that particularly, by the way, relates to the fine structure constant. But there's a particular number, a particular scale, I should say, where this is allowed to happen, where you can have little mini guys in here, and they're not going to get killed by Jupiter or Mars. Now, if you look at all these asteroids, you can see that we're chopping up this one pair of signs, quote, signs next to each other, but really they're just energy bands, right? So Scorpio is an energy band, and Sagittarius is an energy band. And between those two energy bands, you can have more bands. And so the asteroids basically show you signs within signs. And so each of these asteroids has a closest distance to the sun, it's perihelion, and a farthest distance from the sun, it's aphelion, and it has a place where it lives, its semi-major axis, and it's got a span for the number of little microsigns that it moves between its aphelion and perihelion, and that span is going to tell you the character of the asteroid. And here I'm looking at number 153, Hilda. You can see that Hilda is going to correspond to something which is a little bit closer to the, quote, Sagittarius band than some other stuff. And then over here is our friend Laurentia. Laurentia is one of those special asteroids which is associated with good things, and so I named the book after it. Now, a thing that I discovered while I was working on this book was a particular formula. So if you look over here, what you end up having are those four numbers that I told you about: the perihelion, the aphelion, the semi-major axis, and the span of each asteroid. And lots of people challenge astrology to kind of prove itself, and I think that proving astrology is really, really difficult. It's kind of like proving psychology, because the premises for describing phenomena are the same. We've got human stories tacked on to patterns of action, and those patterns of action by themselves are interpreted through the lens of human story. And so it's really hard to say, okay, well, let's go ahead and prove astrology is true. It's kind of like proving that, one fairy tale's moral applies to another fairy tale, the fairy tale of, human behavior. It's very, very difficult. But what you can do is still assign numbers to each of these points. And these points tend to tell a story of a particular process. Now, in general, every asteroid takes on the characteristic of its span, and it represents a process of going from the perihelion to the aphelion, revolving around the actions of the semi-major axis. So for example, if I take something like this, rand between, let's do rand between 1 and say 200. Okay, 80. If I go to line 80, right here, and I attempt to describe what this unknown asteroid would do using numbers instead of using statistics on charts, I did both, by the way, then what I'll see is that we're going from each in the realm of power, right, 8, 8, and 8. We're going from 33s, which is basically group gatherings, to 72s, which is publicizing, well, it's one-to-one communication about social talk or related to social talk. And we're also moving up to 103. And 103, if I recall, let me help myself out. 144, this is the end of Taurus. This is the end of Gemini. This is the end of Cancer. This is the end of Leo. It goes backwards. You'll have to read the third book in order to see what I'm doing. But, crap, where am I? I'm lost. Here we go. Let me just highlight this. Okay. So, let's do a couple more. and this one. Okay. So this is the end of Libra. This is the end of Virgo. This is the end of Leo, Cancer, Gemini, the end of Taurus, and the end of Aries, because these go backwards. So 33s represent group gatherings. Group gatherings. And we're going from group gathering behavior to whatever the 103 is. This is the end of Leo, so it puts us in Cancer, and it's Cancer -5, so it's a Cancer septile. We're going from group gatherings to emotions subject to one-to-one interactions, and it's going to take on the character of 71s, which is a Libra undecile. So it takes on the character of one-to-one interaction publicized. I'm just going to say public. And all of this is going to revolve around, oh, same thing, character, revolving around. So I'm going to say it's revolving around one-to-one communication made public. Okay, so that's what this, oh man, you couldn't see that. I'm so sorry about that. There we go. That's a little bit better. So whatever this is going to revolve around this kind of behavior. Now, I don't know what this is. Let's go ahead and check it out. It is deny, I believe, right here. Where you, whoops, let's get back over there. Where you are a teacher via experience alongside others. And if we go back over to this here, teaching, as you know, is associated with groups and gatherings, but we also have the alongside others stuff, right? So we're emotions and wants, and it's subject to one-to-one communication. You know, I think we have a winner here in terms of an interpretation, because we had a teacher via experience alongside others. This is what deny was about. And you can see that this involves group gatherings for others, teacher via experience, the experience things like the, you know, the moon and all of that intuition type stuff. And it revolves around one-to-one communication made public. It has that particular kind of character. Basically, what we have here is that you can take any asteroid and you can go to the Minor Planet Center and download its orbital elements, and you can use the formula, which I have in Laurentia. It's a little bit complicated for this video, but you can use the formula to estimate the kinds of issues involved with any particular asteroid. And then when you take that asteroid and you look at it in charts, then you'll end up with an actual interpretation, which often, not just often, it usually lines up with those four numbers. Now, the formula I actually use is like I said, it's a little bit complicated. It uses logarithms and things like that. It's in the book Laurentia, but you can plug in these values because they don't come from the Minor Planet Center directly. You actually have to derive them from the semi-major axis and the aphelion and perihelion, and then, you know, do some other stuff on it. But the point is that you can look at the character of these things. By the way, Laurentia, the book, is named after this guy, asteroid number 162. And 162 shows the reason you have jobs and opportunities handed to you. I said it's associated with money without working. Sometimes it is. It depends on if you have money asteroids associated with it. But Laurentia's own character is this one. It's got a span of 76. It goes from 32 to 108, revolving around 73. And you can look these numbers up in 144 and see that it more or less does correspond to what Laurentia does. Anyway, we're approaching a science for this kind of thing. I know there are lots of people out there who say that astrology is bullshit, but of course, if they haven't tested it themselves, then, you know, it's easy to say that something is BS when you don't look at it. But now we're looking at it. And you find that we can describe all kinds of asteroids. I've been having some fun even with the unnamed ones, like, 2009 VN whatever 4 or something, because they all do something in the astrology chart. Before we close this video, I just want to note, however, that there is a kind of diminishing returns associated with this. Once you start looking at the asteroids, first of all, you really stop paying attention to the idea of rulers, because these are within so-called signs. And the asteroids tell a much more high-resolution story than the major planets do. And although you can still use rulerships to do all kinds of predictive stuff, if you're using rulerships, then really the need for asteroids isn't as strong. And if you're using asteroids, the need for certain bodies owning certain bands isn't as strong, because you've got like thousands of bodies. So, what does it mean to own a band when you got thousands of these bands? So also, once you get past the first 1,000 asteroids, except for some really special ones like Eris and Sedna and all of that other stuff, it really stops being worth it to study more. I've looked at the 1,001st asteroid, Gaussia, all the way to 1896. I think the asteroid's called Beer, and they pretty much say the same thing as the first 1,000. So, still, it's a fruitful area of study, and I invite you to check it out and see where all of these really cool asteroids end up in your chart.